My name is Alex Dworjan. I'm an Ansible solution specialist, and today I'm going to be walking through how Ansible and OpenShift can be used together.
Ansible and OpenShift are certainly very different tools. Ansible is an automation tool really designed to help orchestrate and manage everything from Linux and Windows virtual machines to edge devices, networking, cloud, really the full range of IT assets. OpenShift is an enterprise container platform. So this is really helpful for trying to orchestrate different containers, manage their life cycles, really get towards that DevOps mindset with a cloud and container native platform. So how can I use them together? So with the release of the newer automation platform and newer OpenShift pieces, I can actually install Ansible into OpenShift. So there's an operator that exists for the Ansible automation platform, so I can easily deploy Ansible as well as Automation Hub into my OpenShift environment. If I still want to leverage a virtual machine based install, I can leverage what's called a container group to have my execution for certain jobs or for certain organizations run inside my OpenShift environment. So this can give me some of that expandable execution at runtime. That operator does make it much easier in some cases to handle auto scaling, since I can set both requests and limits inside OpenShift for my applications. And then I can upgrade the operator itself, which can streamline some of the actual upgrade process for the Ansible automation platform pieces. From the OpenShift side of things, I can actually leverage Ansible to help manage some of those pieces. So I can look at trying to manage OpenShift as infrastructure as code, leveraging Ansible. So whether it's that post-deployment configuration to set up DNS, Active Directory, or any sort of LDAP settings, all the way through really every underlying piece of OpenShift, I can manage that with Ansible. And then for all the things that don't live inside OpenShift, my physical networking devices, my routers, my switches, my ITSM that don't live inside my container platform, I can leverage Ansible to leverage and kind of orchestrate that tool. The beauty of why these work very well together is they both leverage YAML. So for me, that was the easiest part in getting started with Ansible and OpenShift together. Was I could go into OpenShift, get the exact YAML definition for a certain aspect in there, place that into a playbook, and it was very easy to automate certain pieces because I could leverage the expertise of someone that knew OpenShift to stand up all kinds of things inside the OpenShift environment using a playbook. So now I can have really Ansible with version control systems in place to help deploy and manage every single OpenShift cluster inside my environment. So as I kind of said, what can I do with Ansible in terms of managing OpenShift? So I can use it for really that entire infrastructure orchestration. So it can be the glue that connects hybrid environments and making sure that I can also manage some of the traditional virtual machines, since maybe not everything I have can be containerized. I can also work with some of the hosted databases of the different cloud providers, and then also provide things back to my change request system or my incident system to really start tying everything together. As I talked about before, I can handle that last mile configuration for the OpenShift platform itself. So it's making sure that everything inside my cluster is configured and every additional cluster is configured the same way to my corporate standards. And then I can also handle that process of connecting to DNS, certificate management, LDAP, really to streamline that process of deploying OpenShift, whether it's in an on-prem environment or in the cloud. From the lifecycle side of things, obviously, once a cluster stood up, I still need to manage and operationalize a lot of it. So I can insist on making that a consistent process, and again, having procedures in place to ensure that everything is going from one consistent control plane. And maybe I tie it into something like ServiceNow as my front end for that business process as well. From the business continuity side, obviously, especially with a lot of the applications they're running, they are mission critical. They're very important to my business, so I can make sure as part of my process, maybe I go through regular backups and snapshots and delete those after a certain period of time. So I can really tie all these different pieces together as I look into managing consistent clusters across my entire environment. Maybe I'm leveraging OpenShift to create applications that are going to live out at the edge. Well, how do I deploy those? I can leverage Ansible to deploy those applications, whether it's through some sort of cloud provider that is managing my edge devices or out to a Red Hat Enterprise Linux system that's living on a factory floor inside a store. Gives me that capability to consistently deploy while still leveraging the capability of something like OpenShift to help manage that application creation and management. And then, as I said before, from the continuity side of things, I can ensure that my applications are backed up daily, weekly, monthly, however often I need it to be, do regular operational checks, and then should something go wrong, I can immediately restore back to that backup. So now I've got, again, a version control history of not just the applications themselves, but I can really expand out to the full lifecycle of everything that OpenShift maintains. So it really, again, can streamline a lot of your processes that look into where can Ansible and OpenShift play well together. So I'm going to go into a quick demonstration show Ansible inside OpenShift, as well as how easy it was for me to start managing some of the pieces of OpenShift with Ansible. So first, let's look at the automation platform on OpenShift. So in this case, I'm logged into the Red Hat OpenShift platform, and I'm inside Operator Hub, so I can just search for AAP, and I'll see that I have the Ansible automation platform available to me. So it's already one of my installed operators, so I can go in here and see that I already have this operator installed. It was actually installed earlier today. And this is how I can manage the Ansible automation platform itself. So this allows me to spin up automation controller or the automation hub. And then I can create as many or as few instances of the automation controller as I want. And obviously, just as you'd expect, I can have a full YAML definition that walks through exactly what the automation platform looks like. So I can set up multiple ports. I can set up to have multiple instances, maybe an instance reserved to controller. I'll include in the description down below a reference architecture that provides a lot of the extra information on how I can modify the specs to set up that dedicated controller or set up both the requests and limits, so I don't utilize my entire OpenShift environment to leverage Ansible. Another option that you can look at, as I talked about, is the idea of a container group. So inside the administration of the automation platform in instance groups is the idea of a container group. So I've got a container group set up with an OpenShift bearer token. So I've basically created a separate namespace with a token already set up with a user that has access to that particular namespace. So I've created a service account, conveniently called Ansible, that runs in my environment. And then I can assign this instance group to certain jobs. So I have a patching job, because for me, patching is critical, and I want to use expandable execution for that. So in this patching rel job, I can see that I have OpenShift set as my instance group. It also will go back to the default if for some reason OpenShift isn't available. But when I run this job, it will actually run inside my OpenShift environment. So again, I've got that specific namespace called Ansible. So I can look at the topology and see, as of right now, absolutely nothing is running in this namespace. I'm actually looking at the developer topology. And as soon as this job actually starts running, I'll see it spin up a pod that only lives for the life of the run and then will disappear. So again, this leverages that expandable execution. And as you can see, that pod is now up and running. It will only run during the length of the job and then disappear. So I can have multiple different OpenShift clusters that I'm leveraging and have Ansible connected to. I still have my traditional virtual machine based install for this particular option. So the control nodes themselves live on VMs. I actually have execution nodes living on other VMs, but I still have OpenShift available as an expandable execution for certain jobs. It doesn't default to this, but I've specifically set for either some of my jobs or some of my projects to leverage that instance group. So the other thing I talked about was I can use Ansible to make changes to OpenShift. So obviously every piece of OpenShift in some way, shape, or form has a YAML definition, whether it's networking, I can go into a specific service, go to the YAML definition, and the beauty of Ansible and OpenShift is they both leverage the same language. So it makes it much easier when I say, I've got an existing LDAP configuration that I want to codify. I can copy and paste that into a playbook using the OpenShift collection or using the Kubernetes core collection to start building a lot of these pieces out. And maybe I don't want certain users getting access to OpenShift, but I want them to have an ability through maybe my ITSM to create new web applications or new applications. So in this case, I've actually tied it into ServiceNow. So I've got a service catalog specifically for OpenShift, and I've got a couple applications I've allowed the end user to spin up. So my generic tower application, or because some of us like Pac-Man, I've created a Pac-Man application, and this is all run again through ServiceNow. So the end user never needs to log into Ansible, never needs to log into OpenShift itself. All this leverages is a single playbook. And what this playbook is doing is it's basically logging into OpenShift, creating that application deployment. All I really did was had someone spin this up for me once in OpenShift, and then I copied and pasted the code and conveniently variabilized certain aspects of the application name itself. I've set it up to do 3 replicas, pulling a specific image name. So I've automated this full process where I'm not only creating an application deployment, I'm creating a service for it, and I'm setting up so it can be exposed externally, because obviously that's important for me to be able to actually make connections to it. And there's one thing that I may need to do is I want to tie this into a larger workflow process. So this actually runs a workflow as part of this, not just a single job. And what that workflow did was it actually connected back to ServiceNow to update the service catalog that this action was being performed. It did that web application deployment. And for me, it also emailed me as the end user and updated the service catalog. So that order actually, despite the fact that the user never logged back in afterwards, is closed complete, has a specific link back to that application, and I emailed myself with that application as well. So I can click in here and it brings me directly to that application. So this is exactly how I could tie into something like ServiceNow into a load balancer. If I had multiple of these applications being spun up, I could do all of that through the orchestration of a workflow inside the automation platform. So this is great if I know I have 7 steps or 7 different things that need to be orchestrated in a specific order. I can really leverage the automation platform for that capability. So again, I may not be an Ansible or an OpenShift expert, but I can figure out exactly what that YAML code looks like. So maybe I know, well, there's an OpenShift route. Conveniently, if I jump in here and look for routes, there is this exact route, which looks very much similar to what exists in that playbook. So again, it's very easy to copy and paste and make those changes without getting too detailed into this. Obviously for this one, this is the Ansible and OpenShift one, but I could jump into my default project and find that Pacman service route. So it looks very similar to what you see in that playbook, and that's why it makes it very easy to transfer between the two. Because of the YAML capability, it streamlines a lot of the process. So where can I go next? If you are interested in installing the Ansible automation platform on OpenShift, there's a reference architecture that I'll include down below. It really walks through the details of how I can set up that definition, to set up the requests and the limits, and what we recommend in terms of the specifications so Ansible will run smoothly on the OpenShift platform. Also dive into the specifics around container groups. So if you want to leverage that, if you have a traditional virtual machine based install, I can still leverage OpenShift as it for my patching job to have that expandable execution only for certain jobs or for certain groups. And then last blog kind of walks through, well, what if I want Ansible to make changes to OpenShift? This is a very simple way that kind of walks through some of those pieces. So again, I've worked with some of our solution architects internally on, they were trying to spin up Hypershift, leveraging OC commands and leveraging YAML definitions. By being able to take that information and translate it directly into the OpenShift or the Kubernetes core modules, I was able to also automate that process. So I can really take any sort of Helm aspect, any sort of OC command, any YAML definition that already exists in the OpenShift platform, I can turn that into a playbook, and then that entire process can live as infrastructure as code. So have a similar process anytime I deploy anything inside OpenShift, which then helps when I need to stand up a new cluster somewhere else. I already have that process codified. And that also means my security teams can review it before I deploy, which can streamline a lot of that process for some of my end teams because it's already gone through that security review before we actually deploy. So thanks for taking the time out to learn a little bit more about how Ansible and OpenShift can work together, whether I'm using OpenShift as the hosting platform for the automation platform, or I'm using Ansible to make changes to OpenShift and streamline some of my processes. There are definitely a lot of options with how these two tools can work together. Thank you.